All right. Last week in this shiur on medical ethics, first of all, I'll start off by saying I'm not a rabbi, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a surgeon, I'm not anything. I'm a guy who's learning, and I like to share some of the things that I learn. I pay for these courses, I learn, I try and take good notes, I get good marks on the exams, and when I'm finished, I like to take the work that I'm learning and share it. So, you're getting it. It doesn't cost you anything to come to these classes, and you might learn something, you might not. You might say Marshall's full of malarkey, but nevertheless, the rabbis that I'm taking the sources from are not full of malarkey. And up to this point, what we looked at last week was the fact that there's no leniency for a surgical procedure yet. They said there was no leniency for a surgical procedure which would make a male infertile. Do you remember they said in the Torah, you're not allowed to have damaged testicles, and even to be a Kohen, like serving in the Beit HaMikdash, you had to be complete, meaning you couldn't even have a blemish. They even use the example in the Gemara that if your eyebrows were too long, you could be disqualified. And I said, well, I would have been disqualified for sure. And I think that with all of these rules for perfection, and then they took the rules and put them to the animals and said, you can't sacrifice an animal to God if the animal has a broken leg, a broken paw, a blemish. It has to be pure. It has to be a perfect specimen, a perfect animal, which makes me wonder why God would want that. You would think that God would say, better give me the imperfect one. I'm not, why would you take a perfect animal and offer a perfect animal? Why not offer an imperfect animal? Why destroy a perfect specimen? Those were the rules. And I think about that sometimes. And I also think that maybe part of it has to do with the sin offering, especially because if you committed a Torah violation, a sin, and you had to bring forward a korban chatat, a sin offering, and you took one of your prized, most beautiful animals and took it that it had to be sacrificed, and it couldn't even be eaten. It wasn't like you barbecued it and everybody shared in the barbecue. Remember, you could invite the whole community to some of these sacrifices, and the whole animal had to be eaten in 24 hours by the morning, and everybody would get to share, and you'd have a wonderful festival, because meat, by the way, it wasn't as easy then as it is now. In the Gemara, in those times, there was less meat eaten. You know what the main thing that was eaten was? Bread. Lots of bread and wine. Bread made with sometimes with shuman, meaning fats, and that was eaten. You ate a lot of bread. We're ridiculous. We go to the supermarket and we see meat in bins, and they're all beautifully packaged. Okay, it's expensive, but it's there. You just pick it up and you go home, and you don't think of it even as an animal. You just think of it as something good to eat. So when you offered that korban chatat, a whole perfect animal, you might think this animal is dying because of my sin. Now, there are people out there, we know them, and we don't know them, but we know of them, that wouldn't care less. They'd say, I don't care about an animal. Those are the same people that would drive down the highway and throw a dog out the window. That's nobody in this room, I hope. And we try to be compassionate to animals and think about them. That's why in our country, instead of putting them in cages, like in some countries, and they sit there stuffed up in a cage until they can be sold for food in an illegal meat market, we treat our dogs, we put them into humane societies, we put them into pounds, we try and get them adopted, we do all these things. We care about the animals. So when you kill an animal, you might think, why did I do this sin? Why did I commit this korban? It's the backstory when you think about it, about the idea of perfection and a perfect animal being a specimen. We know the story of Cain and Abel, when Cain said, I'll give the less quality, whatever it is I'm going to sacrifice. Why should I give the best? And he was punished because God didn't want to accept that offering. And when he didn't want to accept that offering, there was jealousy between the two brothers because Abel, was favored in God's eyes. So what did Cain do? He killed him, killed his brother. So we don't want one thing to lead to another, that anybody should be jealous or commit the sin in the first place. But if you are, it might make you feel guilty. Today we have different ways of feeling guilty. We get told, you drove, I drove down Wilmington in the last month. 2 times I went over the speed limit. There's a speed camera in front of Heschel, and they sent me a thing in the mail, $115 for the camera that took a picture of my car. Don't speed by there, because I did it 2 times. It cost me $230, which hurts me in the pocketbook. So I feel now I watch every time I go by there, I think to myself, don't do that. So we learned about this no leniency for a procedure that will make a male less perfect. Let's call it that. Make him infertile. Why is it so important for a male to be fertile? Because the Torah commands that the priya urvia, which means the rule of pru urvu, the commandment in the Torah that says be fruitful and multiply, is incumbent upon the male, not the female. It doesn't say a woman must have children. She must produce children. It doesn't say that. The male has to be responsible for that. So this is, right now, we're talking about male to female transition. If a male wants to transition and become a female, for whatever that reason is, there's no leniency from female to male yet either, because it would render her infertile as a direct causation. So the rabbis are saying, we don't want to allow that. We don't want to cause a direct action on purpose. So then we said that this week we would talk about leniencies for surgical procedures and non-surgical procedures, and what those leniencies might look like. Now, you're not going to all of a sudden get in the first paragraph, boom, it's all allowed. That's not going to happen here. The rabbis, known as Chazal, do it in very slow increments. They bring forward ideas, and they're very slow moving on this. So I brought forth many times the name that sits Eliezer. It's Rav Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg, was halachic master and authority posek at the Shaarei Tzedek Hospital in Yerushalayim. For those of you that watched the live stream with Rabbi Grover when he was talking, and he said, use these words. He said, I'm not a posek, not me, him talking about himself. He said, I'm not a posek. I don't judge law. In fact, most of pastoral services is not people phoning you up and saying, what is my question regarding nida or separation, or how much do I have to say a prayer for taking challah? Or they're not phoning him for this. Is this chicken kosher? It's very rare. The questions that a rabbi get are more about the pastoral services. Someone is sick, someone is ill, someone has passed away, someone might pass away, someone is a gosses. We talked about what that means, or if we didn't, we will. So those are the decisions and how a rabbi would help. They also call them up for a Pesach question. I got so many Pesach questions this year. I really loved it. People were emailing me left, right, and center. Is this good for Pesach? Is this not good for Pesach? Somebody emailed me the other week about a package of hot dogs. They wanted to know if it was kosher or not. And because it has a symbol on it, it has a hechsher, a questionable hechsher. So there's all kinds of decisions. And what one rabbi will say and give to one person as an opinion might be a different opinion for a different case for a different person, depending on the circumstance. So the general rabbis that we have in our community, the ones that are not, the ones that have yora smicha, the ones that are not dayan smicha, dayan, which means judge, those kind of poseks, of rabbis in our community make decisions for giving a get, giving a Jewish divorce, they more serious decisions like what we're talking about today. A rabbi can give you an opinion in a congregation about this, and he can bring forth the sources and tell you, but he can't make a final judgment. That has to be an actual posek. That's a whole different category of rabbi. So let me present a case with all of that intro. Riva Blas just showed up. She just arrived. Thank Baruch Hashem. So we're going to start now with the case, because there has to be a case. What are we talking about? So we'll take the case of a baby which was 6 months old and was born with all of the appearances of looking like a girl. However, even though this baby looked like a girl, from the genetic point of view, the baby was actually a boy. So what I learned in the science part of it was, Bernie can correct me if I'm wrong, was just being XY, just having a Y chromosome is not enough to make someone a male. Is that right? I don't know. You'll tell me. So what I learned was there are certain receptors that are required that have to make this happen. I don't know enough about genetics. I should really go to my daughter, Madeline. She knows more about genetics. That's what she does. But anyway, what I learned was that there's a natural form of the human embryo, which is that of a female. And as far as the male characteristics are concerned, having the Y chromosome is not enough. That's not enough. And there's a whole wide spectrum of ideas. There's a whole wide spectrum of what is considered a male characteristic. So, for instance, if somebody has a deeper voice or a higher voice, in different ways, that could be the way a male could be expressed. Not always. I'm just saying in a lot of cases. Usually, if I talk like this, hello, good morning, Esther, it sounds more like a man, right? So it's an expression. But here is a different case. We have a baby that looks like a female, but genetically, the baby is a male. The child has one testicle, but apart from that, looks completely like a female. Everything about her looks like a girl, but she was born with one testicle. Well, in the words of Rav Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg, who was the halachic decisor at Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. Has anybody here been to that hospital? Ruth has been to the hospital. I hope not for a bad thing, but
Sarah had IVF there.
Okay, wow. So that is it still a Torah observant hospital that is halachically approving IVF, in vitro fertilization we're talking about? I thought so. There are only a few in Israel that are like that. So Isaac is sharing this. This is important. There's a genotypical and phenotypic gender. There are a number of testicular feminization syndromes like what I'm talking about, like the congenital adrenal hyperplasia, where they are genetically male, but phenotypically, outwardly appearance functionally female. Okay, very good. So this is what Rav, I've been to the Shaarei Tzedek also at an emergency. At one of my trips, somebody got ill and I had to take her there, and it was all night long. And I was sitting in the hospital all night, and I see a man there, a doctor. I finally got tired of waiting, and I walked up to him from the emergency. I said, can somebody help us here? Because we're not getting any attention here. As soon as I said we were Canadian, all of a sudden we got full attention. Why? Because the insurance pays full price. That's why. Whereas the other people, they don't pay anything. So all of a sudden we got attention. But here was the answer. The Maisa was, the doctor looked exactly like my neighbor across the street. Exactly like I have a doctor across the street named Dr. David Moretsky. He's a very well-known pediatrician in Toronto. In fact, he's retiring next month. And David Moretsky, this doctor comes out, he looks exactly like David. So I said to him, I said, you look like Dr. David Moretsky in Toronto. The doctor lives across the street from me. And he said, it's my twin brother. For real. It actually was his twin brother. Isn't that? It's like, it's a crazy world that happened to be in. Anyway, so what Rav Waldenberg is saying is, He says, if they do nothing, if the doctors do nothing, if the hospital does nothing, if the parents do nothing, without medical intervention, the halachic status of the baby will surely be that of a female, 100%. Well, that's an interesting statement from Rav Waldenberg. He's saying that without medical intervention, without the doctors intervening and doing something, the halachic status of the baby will be that of a female. This is a baby that was born with one testicle. And he's not saying, oh, well, without doing anything, the baby will look like a female. Well, okay, we already know that because the baby does look like a female. He is saying that halachically, this child will be that purely of a female. That's a big sentence. It's a very big sentence. Welcome, Sandy. We're glad you're here. So the Torah was given to us. We're coming up to Shavuos right now. I like to call it Shavuos. You call it Shavuot. Shavuot, the receiving of the Torah. I'll talk about that on the second day of Shavuot. I'll give a little derasha on that. But the Torah was given to a people that didn't have microscopes. They didn't have petri dishes. They didn't have stethoscopes. The Torah was given to a people that didn't have anything medical to create anything of any kind of intervention. Therefore, halachically, the baby has the status of a female, which she appears as, and not even as being labeled androgynous. Not even. So we have a baby that was born with the XY, having a Y chromosome is not enough, we said. The baby looks like a female. The baby was born with one testicle. The Rabbi Waldenberg is saying the baby will halachically, Jewishly, if nothing is done, have the status of being a female. What does androgynous mean? Androgynous means that a human has both male and female genitalia. Both. It happens. It can happen. It doesn't happen often, but it happens. The baby is born with both sets of genitalia. This is not the case here. This case is nothing to do with that. There are two big categories of a suffix. Those of you that took my kashrut class know what a suffix is. A suffix is a doubt. When you have a doubt, sometimes it's left alone and they say, well, you can take one of two opinions or one of three opinions, depending on what the Rav say. A suffix is a doubt. It's a very important word. And here, an androgynous is someone that falls into the category of a suffix, a doubt, as far as halacha is concerned. If somebody has both male genitalia and female genitalia, then everybody has to get together and work with the doctors, and they have to say, which is it? What is it more like? What is this baby more like? What is this child more like? What is this adult, perhaps even at that stage, more like? Because that's a different category. There's a doubt. You have both sets. This child does not have both sets. And an androgynous is someone that has both sets. The Gemara, the Talmud, alludes to a term called a tumtum. Have anybody heard the word tumtum? All right, not tum-tum is like you chew when you have a digestive problem. Tumtum is someone who is born with a flap of flesh. There's a flap that covers over the genitalia, and underneath the flap, the person is either going to be, when you lift up the flap, when the surgeons lift the flap up, it's like a surprise box. All of a sudden, it's going to be a male or a female. They don't know until they lift the flap. Once they lift the flap up, they can see, does this child have female genitalia? Does the child have male genitalia? That is a suffix. There is a suffix regarding the status of what that baby is. You see that flap, they say in the Gemara, a tumtum. You have to now remove the flap and then discover what this baby is more like. Well, what do you do if a tumtum and the suffix and the doubt that we don't know what is under the flap, they are both doubts. One, you have a flap. One, we don't know what it is. We have to treat them very, very strictly with a chumrah. We have to be very, very strict. And we have to, for example, to insist that they hear what are the Torah commandments of a male? What if it's a male? Males are, according to halacha, obligated to time restraining or time commitments. There are certain things that have to happen on time. Baruch happens to happen at a certain time on Friday night and Shabbat. A male goes to shul. I'm talking about in the Orthodox world. I'm not talking about in our world where everybody goes to shul. Females, males, everybody sits together in shul and we all daven and we all say Baruch Hu and we play a guitar and sing and is happy. In the real world, in the Haredi world, that's not like that. The women stay home. They're busy checking to make sure that the kids are fed, dinner will get ready. The women do not go to shul on Friday night, I can tell you that, in the Haredi world. I went to Bobov in Brooklyn, in Borough Park. There wasn't one female, not one, behind the mechitza. Not one, not on a Friday night. It's not, it's pasnished. They don't come to shul Friday night. And you don't even say Kaddish, by the way. Even if you're saying Kaddish, you let someone else say Kaddish. A man should say Kaddish. That's that world. It's a different. So males have a mitzvah of hearing shofar. And because we don't know if it's a male or a female, but on the other hand, if we won't allow them to blow the shofar, not a baby, but a male adult, let's say that grows up with this, you have to allow them, because if they don't get to blow the shofar, we don't know if it's a man or a woman. So it's not valid for a man to take the place of a female. It's not valid for a female to take the place of a male. When does a female accept Shabbos on Friday night? When do you accept Shabbos?
When you light the candles.
Correct. So you're accepting Shabbos when you light the candles. Do you know some people say, there are some poskim that say that if you light the candles, you can still, until the time of Baruch Hu, do, but it's not an opinion that's widely followed. The Aruch HaShulchan put out an opinion that said that even if you lit candles at that point, that you can still do a malacha. Now, it's interesting on that issue, because when you accept Shabbos in your home because of the mitzvah, you've accepted it. But what if your neighbor across the street is waiting until exactly the time an hour later and they haven't accepted Shabbos yet? If they haven't accepted it, you're allowed to ask your Jewish neighbor to come over to you and turn on your light, turn on your TV, turn on your kettle, turn on your frying pan, do whatever you want, even though they're Jewish. You're not allowed to ask them to do it on Shabbat. We know that. That's asur. That's forbidden. You can't do that. But you are allowed to ask them explicitly, David, come over here and please turn on my crock pot. I forgot to turn it on. I want to have a chillin'. You know what I mean? Like you can say that, but you can't ask them once they've accepted Shabbat. So it depends on what the case is, because David might be saying, I'm not accepting Shabbat until Baruch Hu in shul. He's a male. So there's a different concept there. In concept, the difference between the two suffix, the two doubts, the two sfeikot, is number one, the person who has both male and female genitalia. What does the halacha say about that person? What does that person that has two sets of genitalia have to follow in terms of halacha? But in the case of the tumtum, the case of the one that has not the two sets, but has just a flap covering it, and you don't know, there's a suffix, there's a doubt, you don't know what's there, that resides in the observer who is uncertain about the status person. Once you have the two categories of doubt in mind, you have a double suffix. You have two sfeikot. One kind where the halacha itself is in doubt, and the other kind where the halacha is clear, but the facts are unknown. The facts are unknown. If it's a tumtum, if there's a flap of skin and you don't know what's under there, male or female genitalia, then that leads to a completely different kind of a conclusion. So the person that has with the one testicle, there is no doubt at all. In order to have doubt, you would need two sets of organs. Here, we don't have two sets of organs. We have someone that was born that looks only like a female, but yet she has all the looks of a female, but born with one testicle. So what is this person? The person looks, and according to the Rabbanim, is clearly a female. Well, that's interesting. And this is what Rambam said. He said that a person who has both male and female genitalia, he or she is called androgynous. And we have to treat this person as a doubtful case and be very strict in every situation. So we understand that like establishing gender, which is what we're really talking about here, we're talking about establishing gender, is not a binary situation as far as halacha is concerned. As far as halacha is concerned, there is not just merely two possibilities, male or female. There is also a spectrum in between, from male to female, and there are various categories of doubt, various categories of suffix, of doubt. It's not just clear, male, female. It's not so clear yet. And there are a lot more boxes that we're going to have to check off before we come to the conclusion. It doesn't happen so fast. I told you it's in increments. In any event, in this case, this baby is a female. Period. Why? Because it looks like a female. So what are the rabbis saying? The rabbis are saying, if it looks like an artichoke and it tastes like an artichoke, it's an artichoke, right? All right, but the thing is in this case, the rabbis are giving us a tiny little bit of room for leniency down the road, because they're actually saying here, I'm jumping ahead, but what they're saying is, what you see is what you get. If someone looks like something, that's what they are. It's what the observer sees. Well, we know that there's a prohibition, before we check off the boxes, of castration. We talked about that 2 classes ago, for male animals and for male humans. There's a prohibition. It's a Torah prohibition. It says no serus. Absolutely. It's not a rabbinic prohibition. There's a big difference between a rabbinic prohibition and a Torah prohibition. A rabbinic prohibition, okay, you shouldn't do it. It's not so ay if you did it, but it's not the end of the world if you did it. A Torah prohibition is a completely different category. So now that we've said that this baby is a female, and because it's therefore permissible then to go ahead, simply perform the little surgery, remove that one testicle, because we don't want the woman growing up with a testicle, one which is not going to help her or make her fertile or do anything. It's useless having it there. There's no prohibition of castration in this case. Okay, so that's a big decision. So Tzitz Eliezer, Rav Eliezer Yehuda Waldenberg, the Posek, is saying, based on the Rambam, because you got to base everything on something. You can't just say, I decide. I mean, you have to have a basis. Based on the Rambam, who really is saying what you see and what the observer sees is what it is saying, I see a female born, let's use the example, with 6 toes instead of 5 toes. We don't want her walking funny with shoes that are big shoes. Let's remove that toe. Here we have a female. Maybe it's a bad analogy, but I'm just giving an example. But here we have a female born with 1 testicle. It's going to make it difficult and challenging for her to get married, to date later on. How do you go? So you want her to have a normal, beautiful, healthy life. So the Rabbi Eliezer Waldenberg is saying it's correct in this case to perform the surgery and remove that testicle. And there is no Torah prohibition. You're not violating anything in this case, even though we learned from all the sources before in the last two classes that anyone who damages the testicles, it says in the Torah, anyone who is guilty of a violation of Torah. Well, then doesn't that mean the surgeon who is doing that surgery is guilty of that Torah violation? No, they're saying absolutely not. It doesn't apply in this case because the person, halachically speaking, is not a male. If the person, halachically speaking, is not a male, then the Torah prohibition doesn't apply. This is this much, if you can see my fingers, of a leniency. It's a tiny, tiny leniency in this case. It's not saying, well, there the floodgates are open. Saying that the prohibition of castration doesn't apply in this case, and this tiny, tiny little room of leniency, however, is going to broaden the case. It's going to make the case a little bit bigger in the case of the Tzitz Eliezer's position later on. And he's a heavyweight. He's a big rabbi who is listened to by the rabbinic authorities up until his passing in Eretz Yisrael, by the chief rabbis of the rabbinic court. This is not just Joe Blow making a decision here. This is one of the rabbis that sit on the rabbinic court, along with Rav Avadia Yosef, who was once the chief rabbi of the rabbinic court. Who was before Rav Avadia Yosef? Forget. Somebody remember? Okay. So anyway, the discussion broadens, and Rav Waldenberg continues, and he says there are two basic principles of thought. What we have to learn and understand is that why are we allowing a leniency in this case to remove one testicle when we have these prohibitions? If we were just to leave it there in place, the baby's going to grow up and the testicle is going to produce hormones, and it's going to severely interfere with the girl's development. We don't want that. After all, when this girl reaches development, he says in his tshuva, we are expecting female hormones to be produced, and she will have the form of a female. But this particular girl who has one testicle, and as she grows into puberty, she'll then have high levels of testosterone. It'll cause her to have a male characteristic. And after understanding this, it's also halachically correct to remove the testicle, and there is no problem in removing it. In other words, you got a female here with female hormones going to be created and come across. And then you have this one little aspect of this one testicle that's going to cause male hormones at the same time. So what you're going to have is you're going to have a woman, a girl who reaches puberty, who then starts to develop some of the characteristics that a male might have, like a hairy face like I have. So we don't want that. We don't want her to grow a beard necessarily, right? So a person who is unable to produce children has not the prohibition for castration, right? So if this person can't produce, if she's unable to produce children, then the prohibition of castration wouldn't apply. So through castration, through that process, you are then rendering them infertile. Okay, this is big. The underlying reason why it's permissible to perform the surgery on this infertile person is because this person will never be able to make a woman pregnant. And that's why castration would be acceptable. All this person has is one testicle in this case. So this person will never then father, and this testicle can be removed. See, this baby, if you left the one testicle, and then you said, okay, we're going to change we're going to call this baby no longer a female, which she looks like. We're going to call her a male. She is unable with that one testicle to father children. If she's unable to father children, then they're saying there's a leniency for performing that castration. It's a big sentence. Here's the big sentence. Someone who cannot produce children has no prohibition of castration. Doesn't say a man, a woman. It says someone who cannot produce children has no prohibition of castration. This is a powerful idea by the Sefer HaChinuch. The Sefer HaChinuch, and also, by the way, the Chatam Sofer, and in my learning, I was looking up and going through sources. The Chatam Sofer and the Chatam Sofer embraces this idea that only a person who is fertile has the prohibition of removing a male organ. Only the person who is fertile has that prohibition. If the Chatam Sofer says it, well, so medically as well, it's a good idea to help her not produce too much testosterone. So now we have a medical reason. Forget about the halachic reason. Let's look at medically. There's a reason. We don't want this girl to grow up and be producing testosterone too much. We're going to help her. We're going to help her by removing that one testicle, which is impeding her from being who she is, which is a woman, and that way allow her to not produce too much testosterone so she can have a beautiful life and not have that impediment. Call it an impediment. But a lot of the cases that come forward are not as straightforward as this. This sounds complicated. Believe me, it's not. It's simple. The girl was born. She looks like a girl. Everything about her is a girl, except this one testicle. That, halachically speaking, is a pretty easy decision compared to other cases. But since we have that case to start with, we have, the Tzitz Eliezer wrote books. There's nothing yet in English. I wish somebody would take the time to codify and rewrite his works so everyone could read them and understand them, because they're only in Hebrew, and some of the Hebrew is challenging and difficult and to learn. I mean, I go through a sentence, it takes me a while, but the Tzitz Eliezer wrote a few volumes of his Shelot and Tshuvot, the questions and answers that came to him regarding not just this case, but all kinds of cases that are like this. But what happens is now they've opened a door. There's a little bit of a door that's open for discussion. We can have a discussion now because we can say what happens if someone's born like this and they look like this and they don't look like this. They identify as this. We didn't talk about identify yet, but that's going to come up because we know that people sometimes say, I identify as. So what happens if we have a male baby instead? And the male baby is born, halachically speaking, as a male. As far as the anatomy is concerned, the outward appearance, he looks exactly like a boy. He has no attraction to women. And it's clear that this man is never going to be a father. Not interested in being a father. He's not interested. He is genetically born, halachically speaking, a male. He looks like a man. He's not attracted to women at all. Not interested. And he's open about it. And he says, I'm not attracted to women. Well, it's pretty clear that this person, if that's true, I'm not talking about a child. I'm talking about a grown man who is able to make a decision, because there's all kinds of issues. We are now in a time, in a generation where there is a ton of gender dysphoria. I won't even get into the reasons now, but there is a ton of gender dysphoria in our world right now. And we have to be sensitive, because we started off at the very first class, we said we are all B'Tselem Elokim. We're all in God's image. We have to love everyone. We have to be compassionate to everyone, right? That's the most important thing. But this man who looks like a man is not, he doesn't like women. He's never going to be a father. He's not interested in being a father. It's physically impossible for him to be a father if he's never intimate with a woman. See the statement I said? I didn't say it's physically impossible for him to be a father, period. I said it's physically impossible for him to be a father if he's never intimate with a woman? And therefore, does this fall into the category of the leniency that was brought forward a few moments ago by the Tzitz Eliezer, by Rav Waldenberg? Since he cannot become a father, is there no prohibition for this person to undergo castration? Maybe he can too. The Tzitz Eliezer didn't address it. In the tshuva, he didn't answer it, but by not answering it, he's doing something. Understanding his methodology, he's leaving a door open. Because if he said no, it's no. If he says yes, it's yes. And he's going to have thousands of Haredi rabbis coming down, banging down his door, wanting to burn him at the stake. But he's a compassionate human being. He's a wonderful posek, a brilliant man. And he didn't address it, but he brought forward the idea and the question, does this fall into the category of the leniency that he gave before? Saying, this man is never going to father children. Okay, let's move forward to someone else's opinion so that we can put together what Rav Waldenberg, where he's going. We're going to take that idea that he has and we're going to compartmentalize it over there. And remember, what's the game show? And they had to open up the curtain number one. What's behind curtain number one? We're going to stash it away in curtain number one for right now, because it's an idea, it's a concept, but we don't have any decisions yet. So I've brought forward many, many times, for those of you that are new here to the first class, coming, a rabbi, very well known, one of the rabbanim. I wish if I had to meet one of the rabbis in my, I would have liked to meet them all. I would have met Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, 20th century, Yerushalayim, Ramat Shlomo was named after him. Wonderful, great Dayan and Posek. Brilliant man. Let me think. One of his greatest students was the Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchata. Has anybody heard about this volume? It started off as one volume, a book that he wrote. The Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchata was written by Rabbi Neuwirth. Rabbi Neuwirth survived the Holocaust. Did he move back to Berlin later? I'm not sure. I think he was saved by somebody who was able to save him from a concentration camp and get him out, and he was able to go to Switzerland. Anyway, the family later on of the Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchata posthumously put out a bunch of more of his Sheila and Shuvot, his questions and answers. So the one volume became 3 volumes after he died, but the first volume was his. But you have to question sometimes when you read an opinion by Rabbi Neuwirth, is it his opinion or is it something that he documented and the family put it out posthumously? Anyway, that's not the point. What we're talking about right now is the Shabbat, Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchata was the primary student. So if we ever get to him, you understand that his thinking, even though he didn't always agree with Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he didn't. Lots of times he disagreed. He was his prize student. When you're the prize student of a Rebbe, you're going to be learning their methodology of coming to Halacha. So Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, he died in the, I think, early 90s. I have to look it up and check. He says that according to the Tzitz Eliezer, because they were friendly and they argued plenty, as rabbis do, he said that Tzitz Eliezer, there's a lot of implications to what he said. He says, since the halachic identity depends entirely on what you see with your own eyes, remember I said what you see is what you get? He says, according to this approach, and assuming that transsexual surgery is successful, that it worked, and the person now has the appearance of a male or a female with genitalia, as soon as this person looks like a female or looks like a male, then halachically speaking, That's what this person is. Halachically speaking, transgender surgery is successful in flipping the halachic identity of the person for the male to female or female to male. And he says, not only does the surgery succeed on the halachic level, but on flipping the identity, but it even succeeds wherever the surgery is prohibited. Wow, that last few words that I said, it's like my head is gonna start smoking, because he said it even succeeds where the surgery is prohibited. Okay, we have a male. The male is not allowed to have castration. It's a Torah violation. It's absolutely asur. It's forbidden. But Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is saying, in a sense, too late. It's already done. You've already flipped the switch. You've done the surgery. It's already happened. It's against the Torah. But since you broke the Torah and it's a violation, now you have flipped the identity of that person. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, just because I'm saying that he said this, I'm not saying to you right now that this is the opinion that we follow necessarily. Okay, so don't run away and say, Marshall said this is what we follow. I didn't say that. What I'm saying is this is what Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is saying up to this point of where we are. He's saying that you have now flipped the halachic status. That's huge. That means if a female transgenders and becomes a male, that male should be obligated to blowing shofar, to putting on tefillin, to wearing tzitzit, all of the Torah laws that would apply to a male. The halachic, I didn't just say flipped the gender. He's saying halachically flipped. Halachically means Jewish law, which means you're incumbent to follow all of the Torah mitzvahs now of a male or of a female. So what about vice versa? What about the other way? A male transgenders to a female? Now she's halachically flipped, he's saying. She has all of the leniencies. You know what, if you ask a woman, what leniency do you have on Pesach? I clean and I cook and I do a lot of things on Pesach, but you know, in the traditional ways in the old days, it was the mother, the woman that was standing behind the kitchen making the knedlach and the noodles and cleaning the house and moving the fridge and doing the boxes and moving it up. And the men helped, but the women did a lot of work. It was a tremendous job. And so when I say all of the leniencies, I don't know what the leniencies are. Like, what is so great about that, you know? But I'm just saying that in general, what they're saying is that if the mitzvahs that you had as being a male, you're no longer obligated if it flips over to being a female. So what about the case where transgender surgery, which inevitably involved a castration, the only way that this male can become the female that he wants to become, she wants to become, is to perform that surgery. Inevitably, it involved a castration. Well, this man, before he transgendered, he could have been a father and no longer could be a father. Right? He could have been a father before because he had testicles, he had hormones, he could have fathered. He wasn't interested in women, obviously, so he wasn't going to produce children, father children. But if he wanted to, he could have. If he wanted to is a big thing. So, do you remember in Shabbos and our talks about Shabbos and Halacha, I talked about two big words. I use them over and over. Intent. What is your intention? When you do something, halachically, intent is big. There's two considerations. B'diavad, b'diavad. B'diavad means it's already happened, it's already done. Lechatchila means to start with, in the beginning. All right, it's Shabbos. You know what? I don't care. I'm turning on the light. I want to see the bathroom, and no, that you're not supposed to, right? B'di'evet, I bumped against the wall and I accidentally flipped on the light. That's b'di'evet, it happens, so you leave it on. L'chatchila is with the intent of doing something. Now, we all know if somebody's sick or somebody's going to trip or fall. By the way, this is a huge, I was reading last night, my life is so boring. I mean, I'm lying in bed and I'm reading the Orach HaShulchan, Laws and Shabbos. Most people read a novel, when I want to fall asleep. I fell asleep in 4 minutes. It was perfect reading for this. And he says that the whole issue about shinui, like when someone does something differently, like, so, you're, God forbid, you don't want your mother-in-law to trip in the dark and you got to put the light on. That's why the leniency was made for Shabbos lights to be used for the light that we're supposed to use it to see with, because we don't want, and you can put lights on in Shabbos, they allowed timers for lighting and all this, is because we don't want people to trip and fall in the dark. It's dangerous in the dark. So if you had to flip a light on, you normally use your right hand or your left hand, depending if you're right-handed or left-handed, and you flip the switch, right? You push the switch. It's a Monday, it's a Tuesday. If it's Yontif or if it's Shabbos, perhaps maybe use your left elbow to turn it on. I'm not kidding. It's a shinui, because at least you're showing the intent that I want the light to be on so my mother-in-law doesn't trip. I don't want it to be dangerous, so I'm going to flip it on, but I'm going to do it with a shinui. Showing the intent is different. I'm doing it with my left elbow, which I never normally do. Similarly, when we bury someone, a loved one, we shovel with a shinui. We turn the shovel upside down and use the back of the shovel to show that it's different, a different form of shoveling, not like shoveling snow or gardening, that we're doing it with respect. It's not to say we're reluctant to do the mitzvah like a lot of rabbis say. It's not about reluctancy, really. Reluctant is it's a nice mice, it's a nice vort, but it's really not the truth. We're not reluctant. We actually want to do the mitzvah. You want to perform the mitzvah of chesed shel emet, the mitzvah of filling in a grave. We're supposed to hurry to do it because we're not happy the person died, but you want to perform the mitzvah. Don't leave it to strangers to do it. We want to do a little bit ourselves, maybe all of it ourselves. But we do it with the shinui. We begin with the first or two or three, depending on your custom, shovel to flip it upside down. Shinui is very important. It changes your intention. But once something is already done, you know what? You wake up in the morning on Saturday morning, you forget it's Saturday morning. You don't even remember it's Shabbos. You thought last night was a Tuesday. You get up and it's Wednesday. Before you realize it's Shabbos, because every day is like a Groundhog Day. You go over and you do, the first thing you do is you turn on your electric toothbrush, and halfway through using it, you say, "Oi, it's Shabbos. I'm supposed to use my regular toothbrush. I'm not supposed to use my electric toothbrush. It's already done. You did it. Finish brushing your teeth. Put the toothbrush down. It's not the end of the world. The roof won't fall in. You heard that from me. But I think that on purpose to do it and say, Mamish, it's Shabbos. I'm going to turn on my toothbrush. You don't do that. Intent is very important. Shinui is a way of doing something differently to show that your intent. Well, how does it relate in this case? It relates because the person didn't ask. They don't care what anybody thinks. They're not happy with what they are with they already did it. The surgery's done. It's finished. The castration has already happened. There are plenty of cases where it's prohibited to proceed with the surgery, by the way. Lots of cases. But once it's done, in this case, the halachic identity does flip to the other gender. In other words, now we're talking about a b'di'evet situation. It's done. The surgery's happened. Now what? What do you see now? What you see is we see a female. The gender is flipped. But what Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach is saying here is that the actual gender, halachically speaking, has flipped. That's huge, because he's a giant posek, but it's more than that. It's, to me, when I learned it the first time and we were getting to it, I was astounded. I was shocked. I never would have believed it in a billion years that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach would have said that. In a million years, I wouldn't have believed it. I wouldn't have thought it was even possible that he would say such a thing. He's saying that this is permissible, even though we are going to eliminate the performance of certain mitzvot. Well, I already mentioned that. Now, in his tshuva, he's saying the person will not have the mitzvah, because now what we're talking about is someone who is transgendered to a woman, a trans woman, okay? So a trans woman, prior to surgical intervention, she was a male. And she had the mitzvah of shofar on Rosh Hashanah. And now, after the procedure is done, she is halachically a woman and no longer has the mitzvah of shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Now, we have to remove ourselves from our conservative world for 5 minutes when we say this, because I'm not talking about what Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach didn't go to Bet David or Holy Blossom or Temple Sinai or Adath Israel. He was in an Orthodox world and they're coming up with an Orthodox opinion, but nevertheless, he's finding a huge leniency on his part so far. He might change his mind and say, I changed my mind. So many times, Rabbanim have come through all of these things on why something should be allowed. And in the last two sentences, they go, but I don't agree with anything that I just said. In other words, I gave you all the positions of why something could be allowed, but I would never follow this. And once they say I would never follow this, schon gemacht, it's done. I haven't said that's happened, but that happens a lot with the rabbis. We have 2 more minutes. I'm going to give you 1 more minute here, and then we're going to continue next week with more leniencies because it gets even better. After the surgery, you're going to be a female. Before us now, he's saying, and therefore the prohibition of castration is not producing a castrated male, it's producing a female, and there's no prohibition at all. And this person is now a woman, which is halachically acknowledged according to the Tzitz Eliezer. And he says, assuming that the procedure works correctly, we're not going to end up with a castrated male. If the surgery is done correctly, we don't end up with a castrated male. Consider this case. And he says this, imagine a case where castrating a farm animal killed the animal and the procedure went wrong. If that's what happened and the animal dies during the act of castration, then there was no violation of castration, because after the castration, you don't have a castrated animal anymore. What do you have? A dead animal. You have a dead animal. Well, in order to violate the prohibition of castration, you have to end up with a castrated male. Further, he wrote, the prohibition of damaging the testicles has to do with whether or not a man is permitted to get married. The Torah never actually said it's not permitted to crush the testicles. All it said was that a man was not allowed to come into the community, which means coming into the community meant marrying into the community, getting married, okay? That was their way of saying getting married. So he said there's a prohibition to get married if he has a crushed testicle, but it didn't say you're not allowed to crush a testicle. It hurts, I'm in pain just thinking about it. Anyway, there's a prohibition here, but the door now is getting wide open. Everything's getting open here. So what's the conclusion? We're gonna stop right now. What is the conclusion up to this point before we continue next week? It gets exciting next week, I promise you. The conclusion up to this point is there isn't much reason yet to object to the halachic level of sex reassignment surgery. Let's call it reassignment surgery. That's what it is. There isn't much reason to object because the prohibition of castration no longer applies. It doesn't apply anymore now because Rav Shlomo, he isn't concerned that we're reducing the mitzvah. He says the gender flips once it's done. Once it's done, the gender flips. That's where we conclude up to this point. Next week, we're going to find out from a different tshuva by the same person, by the Tzitz Eliezer, what he continues on. And we're going to discuss something which is beautiful, and this is what excites me. I get shivers when I think about it. You don't, but you come because I'm crazy and you listen to me. What I'm going to talk about next week, and I'm going to share this with you because it's important to understand it, is the methodology of the Tzitz Eliezer. He's a great posek. He worked in Shaarei Tzedek Hospital. He had every case in front of him. He was in charge of the IVF clinic that Ruth alluded to, which is a Torah mitzvot observant clinic. There were so many issues and so many things that he worked with on an ongoing basis. And some of the decisions he had to make were, I would never want to have that burden upon myself, life and death situations. And we're going to talk about his methodology, his approach, his way of determining what will be his final conclusion, what will be how he's going to make a halachic decision. When we learn what his methodology is, you'll understand his thinking. And then from going forward, whatever course we have, you'll have a better understanding of how he gets to where he's going. So we'll do that. We'll continue with that next week for next week's class. And I hope that we all learn something together. And let's all be taught. Well, any questions before we go? Or any ideas? Any thoughts? Any opinions? It's quiet here. Larry, you must have something.
No, I'm only the idea of at your cottage calling your town Chelm was a very, very funny commentary. Very excellent example.
Right. Yeah, it is up there. You know where it is, Larry? Look it up. Sturgeon.
Yeah, I know where it is.
No, it's crazy there. It's a wild place. But everybody, anyway, everything's backwards there. But it's a beautiful place. So, okay, everyone be well, stay healthy, and let's get together again next week and do this and finish this idea off, and then we'll move forward. Okay.
Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you. Everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Take care.
Good job, Marshall.
Thank you. I enjoy it.
We did too.
Thank you.
Oh, it's a great topic.
That's the call, Marshall.